Good morning and welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Cole, today's worship associate. On this spring morning, we welcome you. We know you come here for different reasons, to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your bigger questions. We hope that here you will find comfort, connection, challenge, and love. We have a few announcements this morning. First of all, you need to put it in your mind that on May 15, there is a very important happening here in church. First of all, there won't be any morning worship service on that day. Instead, at 2 p.m. on that Sunday, we'll hold a special celebration to install Reverend Kevin Carson as the third settled minister called by the Unitarian Church in Idaho Falls. The guest speaker will be Reverend Dr. Odette Fulbright-Folsom, Associate Minister of the Unitarian Church of All Souls in New York City. In the church email updates, you received a link to Eventbrite. Please use that link to RSVP regarding your participation in the celebration so we can have a count of those attending. We will also need help from members of the church to set up for the event at 10 a.m. that morning. So instead of the service, it will be us helping set up for the afternoon celebration. And we also would like to have some volunteers to take down what we had set up in the afternoon after the event. So if you are willing to help, please see Catherine Giovanna after the service. Thank you. I'd also like to announce, because I'm involved in it, that there will be a concert for Ukraine on June 10th at the Civic Auditorium, the Civic Center for the Performing Arts. There will be Ukrainian people performing and other people. It's a variety show, basically. And I invite you to buy your tickets now because they're going to go fast, I'm sure. I also have an announcement from Nancy Frank. I would like to call your attention to the brochure at the door announcing the newly updated church database. Nancy and Larry will stay after the service if you would like a demonstration. Please note that if you have joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones that have affected your life in the recent past and that you would like to share with the congregation, you can do so by filling out one of those slips of papers that you find at the entrance of the sanctuary. Or you can also, for those of you online, you can post them in the chat box on the right of the screen. And now is a good time to silence your mobile phones. Thank you. We will not have a dedicated time for an offering this morning, but encourage you to sustain and strengthen this church by making a contribution, either by dropping your contribution in the basket at the entrance of the sanctuary, or by mailing a check to the church at P.O. Box 50376, Idaho Falls, Idaho 83405. Or by going to the church website at idahofallsuu.org. In the Connections menu, click on Donate to get to the Contributions page. Thank you. As I ring the peace bowl 3 times, I invite you to enter into the spirit of worship. with the words of Reverend Bill Schultz. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Please join me now in reading the Church's covenant, which is printed in the order of service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now light the flaming chalice, symbol of our faith, to illumine this day with words by Reverend Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is from Sitting Bull of the Hunkpapa Lakota Nation. Behold, my brothers, the spring has come. The earth has received the embrace of the sun, and we shall soon see the results of that love. Every seed is awakened, and so has all animal life. It is through this mysterious power that we too have our being. And we therefore yield to our neighbors, even our animal neighbors, the same right as ourselves to inhabit the land. I invite you to enjoy our opening hymn, number 63, Spring Has Now Unwrapped the Flowers.
Spring has now unwrapped the flowers, day is fast reviving, life in all her growing powers, toward the light is striving. Gone the iron touch of cold, winter time and frost time, seedlings working through the mold, now make up for lost time. Herb and plant that winter long slumbered at their leisure, now be stirring green and strong, finding growth their pleasure. All the world with beauty fills, gold the green enhancing, flowers make glee among the hills, set the meadows dancing.
Today's Time for All Ages is The Magic Vase, as retold by Margaret Silf. There was once a poor family who lived in a drab little house in the neglected part of the city. They tried to be a happy family, but times were hard and jobs were not easy to come by. As time went on, they began to feel more and more depressed. You could see their depression etching itself even on the house they lived in. They no longer bothered to clean the windows. They didn't tend the little patch of garden in front of the house. The paint peeled off the door and cracks appeared in the brickwork. The threshold of their home showed the sadness in their lives. One day the eldest son of the family was roaming idly through the town, and he came upon a marketplace. The stallholders had set up their wares, and there was a bustle of activity. In spite of his feelings of near despair, the boy found himself being caught up in the excitement of the morning market. He stopped to watch people buying fruits and vegetables, freshly baked bread, and tempting cakes. He noticed the line at the fish stall and took a deep breath of pleasure as he passed the stall of fresh summer flowers. But the stall that attracted him most was a little second-hand stall, tucked away among the awnings of the regular marketers. He had never noticed this stall before. He stopped to investigate. And there, hidden away in the dark recesses, he noticed a beautiful vase. Rapidly, he fingered the coins in his pocket. He had just enough to meet the modest cost of the vase, but there would be nothing left over. Ah, well, he thought to himself, why not? Even if we have a few lean days, I am going to buy this vase. Mom will love it. Everyone will love it. He handed over the contents of his pocket to the woman behind the counter. As she wrapped the vase in brown paper, the stallholder said to the boy, "Enjoy it, won't you? And treat it well, because it is a magic vase." With these mysterious words ringing in his ears, the lad went off home, proudly carrying his purchase. To the boy's surprise, no one reproached him for spending all his money on it. Quite the opposite, in fact. Everyone at home was delighted with the vase. When Dad saw the vase, he realized how shabby the room was, and he went to the cellar, got out the paintbrushes, and gave the room a makeover. And when the second son saw how nice the room looked, with its fresh coat of paint, he fetched a bucket of water and washed the windows and the door for the first time in years. When the third son looked out of the bright new windows, he realized what a state the garden was in and went outside to dig it over. When the fourth son saw the newly dug garden, he planted seeds in the flower bed and watered them lovingly all through the spring. When summer came and the baby daughter of the family went out to play in the garden, she noticed the flowers that had grown from the seeds, and she gathered a bunch of them to give to her mother. "Here are some pretty flowers, Mommy," she said, "because we love you." Mom was overjoyed. With tears rising in her eyes and a lump in her throat, she put the flowers in the magic vase. The end. And now we're going to sing the children out, and we can all go out through those doors.
As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
We now dedicate time to our joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones, a time to share with this religious community events that have affected your life in the past, and to speak out for those we want to hold in our thoughts. The first is from David, who has a question. Community, how do you keep connections in a culture that is based on the automobile and freedom, independence, and cell phones? One from Catherine Giovanna. My daughter, the engineer, was first guitar on 6 pieces at the University of Illinois Guitar Ensemble recital last night. Bravo. Kat had a beautiful day at Grand Teton National Forest with friends. And Jim and Rosie Sathi are celebrating their 55th anniversary on Friday. They will be visiting their daughter next weekend in Kanab, Utah. Congratulations. Do we have any online? Okay, thank you. Oh, we light one last candle to lift up these joys and concerns, as well as the ones that remain in the silence of our hearts.
Our reading this morning is from the book Confucius from the Heart, Ancient Wisdom for Today's World by Yu Dan. And for some context for this reading, Yu Dan, who is a contemporary female Chinese scholar, published this book in 2006, and the television series she did that preceded it became a sensation in China, and it renewed a lot of popular interest in this ancient wisdom. The study of the Analects of Confucius, or any of the great classics, and all of the experiences of the ancient sages and wise men, ultimately has only one essential purpose: to make our lives more meaningful under the radiance of their wisdom, to shorten the road we have to travel, to make us start to feel and think as early as possible like a junzi, a moral exemplar, full of benevolence and kindness, to be able to live up to the junzi's standards of social justice, and be able to stand up with pride and give a good account of our inner hearts and our professional and social duties. I believe that the most important thing about the sages is the way in which they describe the great journey of human life in simple language, and the way their children, grandchildren, and remote descendants put it into practice, generation after generation, whether in ignorance or with intent, painfully or joyfully. In this way, the soul of a nation was formed. Wherever we are, we can let the spiritual power of the ancient classics combine with our contemporary laws and rules, fusing seamlessly together to become an essential component of our lives. To let every one of us build for ourselves a truly worthwhile life. This is surely the ultimate significance of Confucius in our lives today. When most UUs explore Eastern philosophies and religions, it is common to look at Zen or Tibetan Buddhism, which have gained a significant number of adherents in America, or perhaps Hinduism in one or more of its forms, and which continues to grow with the influx of South Asian immigrants. And maybe even Taoism, especially among those seeking to reconnect to nature. But it is less common for Western spiritual seekers to look at Confucianism. And even if you did, it has been hard for Western thinkers to differentiate Confucianism from its essential ties to Chinese culture. In fact, there are many Chinese Confucian scholars who argue that it is a futile task to even attempt to do so. This is complicated by the fact that East Asian religions are often practiced in a culturally syncretic way, with Confucian values mixed with Taoist and Buddhist spirituality, and practices even among those who may not think of themselves as very religious at all. It is even debatable whether Confucianism can be considered a distinct religion in the first place, or if it is better described as an ethical philosophy. If you ask a typical Chinese person if they are a Confucian, they might just give you a funny look. Confucian values and moral principles persist in China as they have for roughly 2,500 years, despite Mao's Cultural Revolution or a long line of emperors and Communist Party leaders who've tried to supplant it with other ideas. But in the late 1980s, a group of Confucian scholars, including most notably Tu Wei Ming of Harvard and Robert Neville and John Berthrong of Boston University, hosted a series of conferences on Confucianism, and one of their main discussion topics was about whether the teachings and practices of Confucianism could translate well into Western, and particularly modern American, ways of life. As their effort became more widely known in academic circles, some people began referring to Boston Confucianism as a joke. But it has since become a name embraced by these American Confucian scholars, which represents a significant effort in introducing Neo-Confucianism to Americans. It is even well known among Chinese Confucian scholars for being the most prominent example of Western Confucianism. And though I do not claim to be a Confucian scholar, what I have read to date on Boston Confucianism suggests to me that this fresh look on an ancient religion might be a good fit for Unitarian Universalists to explore. And besides, it's from Boston, so it has to be good for UUs. Confucianism is largely unknown in America, and I'm guessing that most of you are not Confucian scholars. So let me begin with an overview of the basics. Over 2,500 years ago, a teacher and philosopher, Confucian, who lived between 551 and 479 BCE and is better known to us by his Latinized name Confucius, laid the foundations of a system of beliefs and practices for living an ethical and virtuous life. His belief that all human beings could benefit from education and his emphasis on lifelong learning are as important to his legacy as the essential teachings of his moral philosophy. He believed in learning for the sake of self, encouraging the kind of self-improvement that has resonated among Unitarian Universalists for centuries. I'm sure that Confucius would have appreciated reading any of Channing's sermons on the need to cultivate salvation by character, for example, or Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance, though he may have disagreed somewhat with Emerson's insistence on individuality, probably asserting the need for a stronger coherence with societal values. Many of Confucius' teachings were then collected into the Lunyu, which means conversations, which we know in the West as the Analects of Confucius. Though it was first published widely in 1190, scholars believe it was written by Confucian scholars during the Warring States period of China between 475 and 221 BCE, just after Confucius' death. So the authenticity of the sayings is believed to be very high and is considered to be the primary source of Confucian thought. And it is divided into 20 books that contain the sayings of Confucius rather than any form of narrative. It is similar in form to the non-canonical Christian Gospel of Thomas that contains a list of sayings attributed to Jesus. A couple of examples of Confucius' sayings are, "The master said, 'Is it not a pleasure, having learned something, to try it out at due intervals? Is it not a joy to have friends come from afar? Is it not gentlemanly not to take offense when others fail to appreciate your abilities?' And the master said, 'When faced with the opportunity to practice benevolence, do not give precedence even to your teacher.'" You can see how sayings like this may lend themselves to fortune cookie proverbs when they are translated and removed from their original context. But in the books of the Analects, they are often grouped based on common themes. The main teachings of Confucius center on practicing 5 virtues in our daily life: kindness, goodness, honesty, modesty, wisdom, and trustworthiness, a goal that all of us can appreciate, though we recognize how difficult it may be to realize. The ideal for Confucius was to become a junzi, or moral exemplar, through a lifelong journey of education and practicing moral virtues. The other characteristics that define Confucianism are expressed in the concept of li, meaning propriety and ritual. And these include ancestor worship and filial piety, being loyal to one's family. There are no gods or deities in Confucianism. Though Confucius has become revered by many as a kind of spirit. In Confucian temples, for example, people often write petitions to Confucius asking for help with a career change or other major life decision. Confucius himself seems to have been at best agnostic on the subject of deities or life after death. According to one account, when he was asked about how one should best serve the gods and spirits, he answered that as he was not able even to serve man, how could he serve the spirits? Similarly, when asked about what lies beyond death, he said, as he did not understand even life, how could he understand death? Though there is strong evidence to suggest that Confucius was revered as a sage during his own lifetime, posthumously, he has become revered as a sage endowed with almost otherworldly wisdom that he would no doubt have found absurd. This does not mean beliefs in deities is precluded, and in fact, as I mentioned earlier, many practicing Confucians identify as also being Buddhists, Taoists, and even Christians, in a syncretic way that is uncommon in the West. Fundamental to most East Asian religions is an emphasis on harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity, rather than theological concerns about the nature of the divine. I believe the Confucian focus on human moral behavior and creating a more harmonious and educated society, rather than requiring a profession of a set of beliefs, explains the longevity of this ancient religious philosophy. Gods come and go in the human imagination, but the need to get along with one another in society is a constant fact of life. I would never be so bold as to say with certainty there is nothing sacred and eternal that underlies and sustains the cosmos, but I am saying that our experience and understanding of that sacred something continues to evolve over time. Morals also evolve, but human nature, and especially our frailties and baser instincts, seem to remain a constant challenge to achieving any vision of a better world, no matter how much knowledge we accumulate or what our prevailing concept of the divine may be. It is important to understand the world into which Confucius was born when reflecting on his sayings. And this is especially important when we evaluate some of the criticism his teachings receive on the subject of loyalty to the state and the need to keep a strict moral code. He's often criticized as being extremely conservative by today's standards. Being born during China's Warring States period, Confucius' world was filled with violence and chaos as feudal lords sought to dominate one another. And as always, the ordinary people bore the brunt of the suffering. He was born in the small city-state of Lu in modern Shandong province in eastern China. In addition to the warring states all around him, the ruler of Lu was weakened by powerful families who really controlled the state. Confucius did not like the oligarchs and believed that power should rest in just rulers who were educated and virtuous. And so we see much of this in his teachings, and also about the relationship between being a benevolent ruler and the responsibilities of the ruled. Though it is fair to challenge the lack of emphasis on egalitarianism and individual freedom in Confucius' original teachings, I think you have to consider the realities of feudal China in the 6th century BCE. The type of governance he advocated for was at least a lot better than the chaotic world of strongmen and oligarchs that was the norm. This doesn't mean that Confucianism has not or cannot evolve to inform more democratic and egalitarian societies in modern times. As the Boston Confucians might argue, the principles of kindness, goodness, honesty, modesty, wisdom, and trustworthiness are, of course, timeless. And how we can put them into practice in a liberal Western democracy may be a bit different and in some ways much easier. Over the centuries of Chinese history that followed, Confucianism fell in and out of favor, and later scholars such as Mencius refined and enhanced the philosophy. It was revered in the Han Dynasty in the 200s, for example, and anathema in the Qin Dynasty that replaced it. And this back and forth continues even today. Its teachings were despised during the Cultural Revolution as antiquated feudalism under Mao. But with the embrace of capitalism in China in recent decades, interest in Confucianism has surged. As the Chinese scholar Yu Dan notes, the breakdown in China's social value system and moral code that came with the transition away from the rigid authoritarianism under Mao has left an increasing gap between the rich and the poor, growing social unrest and perceived injustices, rampant corruption, and apparently an insatiable greed which has led millions of Chinese on a search for answers as how to pursue a happy and balanced life in the whirlpool of a fast-changing world. Yu Dan goes on to argue that the ancient sage Confucius has once again been called to the rescue. I am not at all surprised that Chinese people would look back to their ancient spiritual roots as official condemnation of religion has ceased. It has always been there in the culture, lurking in the shadows, waiting for rebirth. I'm also not surprised that Western interest in Confucianism has increased recently, since the exchange of ideas and cultures has accelerated in this information age. In Rudyard Kipling's poem, The Ballad of East and West, which admittedly reflects some of the European racist overtones from the year 1889 when it was written, he famously wrote, "O East is East, and West is West, and never the twain shall meet." It was a commentary on the strangeness of Eastern thinking from the Western perspective. But I think the world is a very different place than it was a century and a half ago. There are still cultural and linguistic barriers to overcome, but cross-pollination between the world's religions and cultures is much more prevalent today. If you enjoyed a familiar pop music feel listening to our gathering music this morning, that is because it is a contemporary Chinese song that reflects Western pop music influence. The song is the theme song for a popular anime series based loosely on the life of the real-life Emperor Sun Quan, who ruled the state of Wu from 222 to 259. The traditional Chinese instruments in the version you heard gave it a distinctive Han Chinese sound, but the form is that of a Western pop song. The original version of this song with lyrics is wildly popular in China, and the same is true of much East-West blended music these days. Who knows, maybe Confucianism will become a popular East-West philosophical blend in return. Time will tell. The scholars working on Boston Confucianism acknowledge that there are a number of challenges to Western adoption beyond its East Asian roots, but they're quick to point out that many preconceptions are simply overstated. One of the easiest to debunk is that one must at least read classical Chinese and have a unique appreciation for the Asian spirituality to incorporate Confucianism into one's way of life. The best argument against this is the figure of the Confucian scholar Robert Cummings Neville, who does not read or write Chinese and identifies as both Confucian and Christian. The fact that he has a dual religious identity points to a second argument that having a syncretic religious identity is alien to Western culture. It is true that most Americans, for example, identify with a single religious faith or no faith and profess truth claims that are exclusive in nature. But that is not true of all Americans. There are many so-called mixed families where the parents come from different faith traditions and the children are raised with a dual identity. And of course, there is Unitarian Universalism. We are perhaps the vanguard and poster child for people who claim multiple religious identities. Our ranks are filled with hyphenated identities such as UU Buddhists, UU Christians, and so on. It takes little imagination to see a developing UU Confucianism on the horizon, or even an implicit combination of UU Confucian values blended with something else like religious naturalism that many UUs would find appealing. And since much of the Western Confucian scholarship is coming out of Boston, enriching our tradition is only a few stops away on the MBTA for many UU ministers, headquarters staff, and laity. There are many other challenges for Boston Confucianism, far beyond the scope of a single sermon, but the biggest is probably the marriage of Confucianism and Western philosophy. As Tu Wei Ming writes, the importance of the primary scriptures of Confucianism to a living tradition in the West, however, requires that the interpretive context be not only the I Ching, but also Plato's Republic. Just as Neo-Confucianism in the Song and Ming dynasties learned from the Buddhist and the Taoist, Boston Confucianism learns from the pragmatist and must interpret itself to the Kantians, phenomenologists, and Western logicians. Going forward, it is hard to predict the future of Boston Confucianism, though it is hard to see it developing into more than a niche movement anytime soon. Perhaps some traditional Confucian rituals, like cleaning the graves of the ancestors and leaving ritual treats, may gain some traction in the West, beyond the Chinese diaspora. But more likely, I suspect, Western Confucians will develop their own unique rituals and express Confucian values in a new context. As I've already suggested, I think there is much to explore in Boston Confucianism from a UU perspective for many reasons. And as more of us learn about it, maybe it will become a significant spiritual path for many people. If nothing else, it adds to the rich tapestry of our faith. And despite the political turmoil in so many places around the world, I still have hope that we will continue to get to know one another better and revel in our beautiful spiritual diversity. Wouldn't it be nice if a few learned and virtuous Junzi leaders were to emerge and make the world a better place? I invite you to enjoy our closing hymn, number 60, In Time of Silver Rain.
In time of silver rain, the earth puts forth new life again. Green grasses grow and flowers lift their heads, and over all the plain the wonder spreads of life, of life.
closing words come from the essay, The Big Picture, The Meaning of Life, by Tu Wei Ming in the December 1988 issue of Life magazine. Copernicus decentered the earth. Darwin relativized the godlike image of man. Marx exploded the ideology of social harmony, and Freud complicated our conscious life. They have redefined humanity for the modern age. Yet, they have also empowered us with a communal, critical self-awareness to renew our faith in the ancient Confucian wisdom that the globe is the center of our universe and the only home for us, and that we are guardians of the good earth, the trustees of the mandate of heaven that enjoins us to make our bodies healthy, our hearts sensitive, our minds alert, our souls refined, and our spirits brilliant. We are here because embedded in our human nature is the secret code for heaven's self-realization. Heaven is certainly omnipresent, may even be omniscient, but is most likely not omnipotent. It needs our active participation to realize its own truth. We are heaven's partners, indeed co-creators. We serve heaven with common sense, the lack of which nowadays has brought us to the brink of self-destruction. Since we help heaven to realize itself through our self-discovery and self-understanding in day-to-day living, the ultimate meaning of life is found in our ordinary human existence.
Please join me now in reading the words for the extinguishing of our flaming chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.